I know that when I was asked to participate in this panel, it was most likely expected that I would lament today's obsession with obsolescence and the triumph of the ephemeral, that I would proclaim the lasting qualities of art while decrying its diminishment in the culture at large and in too many cases, unfortunately, in the museum world as well. I would, of course, be perfectly willing and ready to expatiate along those lines. However, in the hope of eliciting a more lively discussion, I have chosen to speak instead of that other melancholy reality, and this one is permanent because it is in the nature of the thing. I am referring to the inherent fragility of works of art, their precarious existence, their surprising vulnerability in the operating room of time. For from the moment of their creation, works of art are thrust into the physical world and all its vicissitudes. In short, the reality is that works of art, by their very nature, are ineluctably on an entropic path of disappearance through deterioration. Now, let me give my first example. This most sweet of angels, who guides the hand of a totally bemused Matthew with the tips of his fingers expressing ineffable tenderness, is one of those unforgettable genial inventions that stays with one forever. In this instance, only in our mind's eye, or through this black and white photograph, because this painting, along with some 450 other masterpieces of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum that was renamed the Bode in 1956, was destroyed during the Allied bombings in Berlin in 1945. This is one of the two large Rubens galleries before the war. Then came the bombs. I want to underscore today not only how vulnerable are works of art, but also how fragmentary is much of the art that we see in museums, at least of the past. Not only because, as in the case of many antiquities, it is often broken pieces that have survived and not the whole, but also because fragments, and this time not only ancient, would result from dismemberment or displacement. Dismemberment, as of altarpieces with their predella panels scattered among collections in museums around the world, or palace decorations displaced and in effect neutralized when subtracted from their original programmatic or architectural setting. In the case of ancient art, ironically, it is the exhibited fragment that is enduring, and it is the whole, either lost or forgotten, that is ephemeral. Fragments, then, are not so much ars brevis as ars longa, precisely because they survive as the only tangible vestiges of lost civilizations, especially in the case of those that have no writing. The more one studies works of art, and museums as well, the more one is struck that more often than not, it is change that is the norm. To take but one example, the canon that is continually shifting, as with the Parthenon marbles in the early 19th century, displacing the Apollo Belvedere as the nec plus ultra of ancient art. Such shifts in taste suggest that attitudes toward art and its meaning as well as its affect are as contingent as they are inherent. In fact, we live in a world of permanent impermanence, with the result that it is through that immaterial attribute, the value we place on art, that we fend off its ephemerality. We confer permanence through our system of values. This has its flip side, I'm afraid, for it has been shown that it is precisely because we place a high value on certain monuments, as in the Middle East, that these are being destroyed. We place them at risk in the eyes of our iconoclastic enemies by our very attachment to them. And I could say that nowadays, conferring on a site the seal of approval of, let's say, UNESCO is most likely to condemn them. But returning to the subject of the symposium, the museum, let me say that it is clear that they too, museums, manifest change, even sometimes impermanence. One of the first museums to open its doors to the public, albeit a limited public, was in Düsseldorf, fully catalogued in the 18th century. It is now, and since 1805, the core of the Alte Pinakothek in Munich, an accident of princely inheritance. And we have our own variant in New York State, as we've already heard, with that of the Albright Knox, disposing of much older art in order to morph into a museum of modern and contemporary art. But change in the museum world need not be altogether a bad thing. Even granting that some of us still want to reflect authority in the sense of expertise, this does not mean museum as mausoleum, but rather the museum as the home of ever-changing narratives and explorations to better indicate the complexities of an artwork's place and meaning in space and in time. One such example would be the recent inclusion into the Byzantine canon, once dominated by the production of imperial Constantinople, of such regional schools as Ethiopian Christian art, once considered merely provincial. This yet another manifestation of the shifting canon. Works of art are in perpetual mutation in answer to different times and correspondingly to different responses, because they are not only in conversation with each other in most installations, thus in an ever-changing dialogue, but it is one that mirrors our own changing conversation. As to how works of art look, we need to remember that from time immemorial, they have been subjected to human interventions. First, directly, when overpainted or badly abraded, and I'm going to bring up Yale, as in the case of the Jarvis collection of Italian primitives at Yale, or faded beyond redemption, as in the Rothkos at the Fog. One has to even things out. Such lamentable interventions can even be compounded, as this Sebastiano del Piombo in Cambridge, in the Fitzwilliam, first ruined, as you see here, in a transfer from panel to canvas that occurred in the last century, and in my view, now ruined a second time through extensive repainting. The picture today, bluntly put, is no longer a Sebastiano. And then again, a lot of art has been totally destroyed, not just altered, ars really brevis, and I refer to the catastrophic fires in the 17th century at London's Whitehall, or the Alcázar of Madrid, or the thousands of ancient Greek bronzes converted into cannons. I mean this time the firing kind. So when it comes to works of art or architecture, I'm afraid permanence is of a rather chimerical nature. So since inevitably, Tempus, fugit, and ars brevis, let me end by stressing once again that if at least temporary permanence is going to be achieved, it will be through the value we attach and confer on works of art. It is through our love and probing interest that they survive, which allows me to come back full circle to the museum, the prime venue in our time for the experience of art, however much the conversation may change. Thank you.